Let me begin with a question that I don't think the mainstream media is asking seriously enough. When a president stands before his nation and says, "We are winning," what does that actually tell you? Think about it carefully. If you are genuinely winning, you don't need to announce it. Victory announces itself. The fact that it requires a speech, a podium, a primetime slot that tells you something important about the real state of affairs. Now, in recent weeks, we have seen two major announcements come out of Washington simultaneously. The first, that American military operations against Iran are progressing and will intensify dramatically. The second, what has been called the Greater North America Security Perimeter, a doctrine suggesting that the United States now considers itself the rightful authority over everything from Greenland in the north to Venezuela in the south. And most commentators look at these two things and say, this is chaos, this is incoherence, this is the behavior of an administration without a compass. I want to argue the exact opposite today. I want to suggest that there is, in fact, a very deliberate logic at work. That these two things, the Iran campaign and the North America doctrine, are not contradictory. They are two halves of the same strategy. Whether that strategy will work is a separate question, but let us first understand what it actually is. Before we discuss strategy, we need to discuss geography, because geography, in military affairs, is destiny. Iran is not a small country. It is roughly 4 times the size of Iraq, with a population approaching 90 million people. But more importantly, and this is what the maps on television rarely convey, Iran is a country of extraordinary natural fortification. Look at the western border, which shares terrain with Iraq. That is where the Zagros mountain range begins. These mountains run for nearly 1,500 kilometers, from the northwest all the way to the Persian Gulf. They are not gentle hills. They are rugged, layered, and deeply cut by river valleys. Perfect terrain for defensive warfare, for ambush, for the kind of patient, decentralized resistance that has broken modern armies before. If American ground forces were to enter from Iraq, the most logistically obvious route, they would immediately face this mountain barrier. Supply lines would stretch thin. Air support would be complicated by terrain. Every pass becomes a choke point. Every ridge becomes a sniper position. The eastern approach from Pakistan presents different but equally serious problems. Vast desert, extreme distances from Tehran, and a starting point that is politically fraught given Pakistan's own instability. The southern approach, across the Persian Gulf, solves some problems and creates others. You bypass the Zagros, yes, but you now face a different mountain range further inland, and Tehran remains hundreds of kilometers away. Here is the arithmetic that matters. The United States currently has approximately 50,000 troops deployed across the Middle East. Military analysts who study this seriously suggest that to occupy and hold a country the size and complexity of Iran, you would need somewhere between 3 and 4 million soldiers. America's entire active duty military stands at roughly 1.3 million. The numbers do not add up. They cannot add up, and this raises a fundamental question. If a ground invasion is being prepared, what is it actually intended to accomplish? Now, I want to be careful here, because in geopolitics there is always a risk of pattern matching, of seeing intention in noise. But several signals have emerged that deserve serious attention. First, reserve military personnel across the United States have reportedly received communications instructing them to prepare for potential deployment. These are not the normal rotation notices. The language, by several accounts, is more urgent. Second, prediction markets. And I want to explain why these matter. Prediction markets are platforms where individuals place real money on the likelihood of future events. They are not polls. They are not opinion surveys. When someone stakes $200,000 on the probability of a ground invasion occurring and stands to win over $1 million if it happens, they are not guessing. They have done their homework. Perhaps they have sources. Perhaps they have read something we haven't. The aggregate of such bets constitutes, in many ways, a more honest assessment than any official briefing. Third, and this one is almost amusing, but it's historically grounded, pizza delivery orders to the Pentagon have reportedly surged. I know that sounds trivial, but military historians have noted this pattern before when the Pentagon operates around the clock, when staff are sleeping in offices, skipping meals, running 20-hour shifts, late-night food deliveries spike. It's an unintentional signal, but it's a real one. The question is not whether something is being prepared. The question is, to what end? Let me now walk you through what actually happens if ground troops enter Iran. I want to do this step by step using game theory, which simply means following the logic of each actor's rational response. Step 1. Iran activates a defense built over 25 years. This is the part that receives almost no coverage in Western media, and it is perhaps the most consequential fact in this entire analysis. Iran has not been sitting idle since the 1990s. It has been conducting what amounts to the most sustained study of American military vulnerability ever undertaken by a nation-state. It examined Vietnam, It examined the Soviet experience in Afghanistan. It examined America's own wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And from those studies, it reverse engineered a military doctrine. The result? A network of underground facilities, missile batteries, drone arsenals, command centers embedded deep within mountain ranges. In the ongoing air campaign, we have seen only one cluster of these facilities engaged. Analysts believe there are many more, untouched, waiting. The tactical implication is significant. American forces entering Iran would initially make progress. CNN would show maps with red arrows advancing. There would be declarations of early success. But then, and this is the pattern that repeats itself in every asymmetric conflict America has entered, the terrain would begin to work against them. Supply convoys would be targeted. Helicopters, which are essential to mountain warfare, would become priority targets for weapons specifically designed to bring them down. Fuel trucks, ammunition depots, field hospitals, all of it vulnerable. America is genuinely the most powerful first strike military in the world. Its ability to project force quickly, to destroy fixed targets, to win the opening hours of a conflict, this is not in dispute. What is in dispute is what happens in month 3, month 7, year 2. Step 2, the Strait of Hormuz closes, and the world runs out of things you didn't know came from there. Here is where I want to spend some time, because this is the piece of the analysis that most commentators skip entirely. Everyone understands that closing the Strait of Hormuz disrupts oil. 20% of the world's petroleum supply passes through that narrow waterway. Iran has stated publicly that in the event of a full-scale conflict, it would mine the strait, target tankers, and strike Gulf Cooperation Council energy infrastructure simultaneously. The goal, as Iranian officials have framed it, oil at $200 per barrel. It currently trades near $100. But oil is not the whole story. What also flows through Hormuz in quantities that most people are entirely unaware of is the raw material supply for global food production. Phosphate, ammonia, sulfur, urea. These are the chemical building blocks of agricultural fertilizers. Without them, farmers across Asia, Europe, and Africa cannot maintain crop yields. We're not talking about expensive food. We're talking about food shortages in the most direct and serious sense. Additionally, and this surprised me when I first encountered the data, helium and sulfuric acid transit this route in significant quantities. Both are essential inputs for semiconductor manufacturing. Semiconductors, of course, power everything from mobile phones to artificial intelligence infrastructure. The technology sector that currently constitutes such a large share of American market capitalization depends, further upstream than most realize, on supply chains that pass through the Persian Gulf. J.P. Morgan, not known for alarmism, has issued analysis suggesting that if current disruptions continue, global oil reserves could reach critical lows within weeks. This is not a recession scenario. This is a depression scenario, a real one. Step 3, the petrodollar system fractures. Now we reach the deepest layer of this analysis, and I want to explain it carefully because it requires a brief history lesson. In 1973, the United States reached an agreement with Saudi Arabia and, subsequently, the other major Gulf oil producers. The arrangement was elegant in its simplicity. All global oil sales would be denominated in U.S. dollars. In exchange, America would provide the Gulf states with military protection and security guarantees. The consequence of this arrangement is that every nation on Earth that needs oil, which is every nation on Earth, must acquire U.S. dollars to purchase it. This creates permanent structural global demand for the American dollar. And that demand is what allows the United States to carry $39 trillion in national debt without the kind of currency crisis that would destroy any other country. It is, in the most technical sense, a confidence system, and like all confidence systems, it functions only as long as confidence holds. Now, who are the largest holders of American debt? Japan, China, Taiwan, Singapore, India, Europe. And where do all of these nations source the majority of their oil? The Middle East, the Gulf. If a ground war in Iran destabilizes those Gulf states, if Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar face infrastructure destruction and political upheaval, they can no longer reliably sell oil in dollars. And if they cannot, then Japan and China and South Korea and Germany have no structural reason to continue accumulating dollars. They stop buying American treasury bonds. And if they stop buying American debt, the entire financial architecture of the post-war American order faces a stress test. It was not designed to survive. Interest rates rise, the dollar weakens, equity markets collapse, the end of the American financial empire is not a metaphor, it becomes a balance sheet. And here is where I want to ask you to hold two contradictory ideas in your mind simultaneously, because this is where the analysis becomes genuinely uncomfortable. What if this outcome is not a bug? What if it is the feature? I want to be precise about what I am and am not claiming. I am not claiming that any single individual designed this scenario from a whiteboard and executed it flawlessly. History is rarely that clean. But I am suggesting that there is a coherent strategic logic that connects everything we are seeing: the Iran campaign, the Venezuela situation, the Greenland pressure, the Canada friction, the push to end the Ukraine conflict, and that logic points in one direction. When the Strait of Hormuz closes and Middle Eastern energy supply is disrupted, the world does not stop needing energy. It does not stop needing food. It simply needs to find new suppliers. And the new suppliers are the United States, which sits on enormous oil and gas reserves; Canada, which has among the largest proven reserves in the world; Venezuela, which holds the single largest proven oil reserve on the planet, and which has recently come under significantly expanded American influence; Mexico, and North America's agricultural output, which is already the backbone of global food supply. There is a strategic concept being discussed in certain circles, referred to informally as the technate, a self-sufficient North American economic bloc. 2 oceans as natural protection, comprehensive resource independence, the capacity to become the world's indispensable supplier precisely at the moment when the old supply chains collapse. Under this logic, and I want to emphasize this is a hypothesis, not a confirmed policy, America does not need to win the war in Iran. America needs the war in Iran to happen. The military outcome is secondary to the resource realignment that follows. This strategy did not emerge from nowhere. There is an intellectual genealogy here that is worth tracing. In 1996, a Russian philosopher named Alexander Dugin published a book called The Foundations of Geopolitics. It is not light reading, but its central argument is stark. The Western liberal order, built on individualism, secular consumerism, and the dissolution of national and cultural identity, is inherently unstable. It will collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. It cannot sustain itself. Dugin's advice to Russia was not to fight this collapse or to try to save the Western order. His advice was to step back, to remain cohesive through nationalism, through religious identity, through a strong sense of civilizational purpose. And when the liberal order falls, Russia will still be standing. Vladimir Putin read this argument seriously. The war in Ukraine, whatever else it is, has functioned in certain respects as a test of this thesis. Russia's economy, subjected to the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history, did not collapse. Instead, it restructured. Industrial production increased. Military manufacturing surged. Russia began producing at scale things it previously imported. It became, in a grim and specific way, more self-sufficient. The parallel to what we are seeing in Washington is not exact, but it is not coincidental either. George H.W. Bush in 1991 articulated a vision of American power based on 3 pillars: financial dominance through Wall Street and globalized trade, secular multiculturalism as the organizing social principle, and Pax Americana, the United States as the guarantor and funder of global security. That order produced extraordinary wealth for some. It also hollowed out the American manufacturing base, concentrated prosperity in narrow geographic and social strata, and ran up a debt load that now stands at $39 trillion. The alternative vision, call it whatever you like, involves a return to resource and manufacturing primacy over financial engineering, a reassertion of cultural and national identity as organizing principles, and a withdrawal from the role of global policeman in favor of a continental fortress. To transition from one order to the other, the old order must first be dismantled. Let me offer you 2 possible trajectories, because I think intellectual honesty requires acknowledging that this situation has more than one plausible outcome. Scenario A: the ground campaign, if it occurs, becomes protracted. American forces face precisely the conditions I have described. Casualties mount, political will erodes. After months or years, a withdrawal becomes unavoidable. The military empire's presence in the Middle East effectively ends. The petrodollar weakens or fragments. A global depression follows. But, and this is the counterintuitive part, North America, protected by its geography and its resource wealth, emerges as the stable center of an unstable world. It becomes the supplier of last resort: energy, food, fertilizers. The rest of the world, desperate, pays whatever price is asked. Scenario B: the campaign drags on for years. A war of attrition, expensive, grinding, politically difficult, but sustained. The global economy operates under chronic stress. Oil and food prices remain elevated for an extended period. In the background, quietly, the North American resource bloc consolidates. The technate is built not through a dramatic rupture, but through slow accumulation. The endpoint of both scenarios is structurally similar. The liberal global order ends. North America becomes more self-sufficient and more powerful in relative terms. Europe and Asia become more dependent on North American resources. The difference is timing and human cost. I want to close with the question that I think should sit at the center of any serious analysis of this moment. We have spent 20 minutes discussing strategy, doctrine, resource flows, financial architecture, game theory, and all of that is legitimate. Understanding these mechanisms matters. But strategy is not experienced by nations in the abstract, it is experienced by people. American men and women who will be handed rifles and told that this time it will be different. Iranian families in cities that have nothing to do with any geopolitical doctrine. Farmers in sub-Saharan Africa whose yields collapse because the fertilizer supply chain has been severed by a war fought 6,000 kilometers away. Children in countries that have never appeared on an American news broadcast, who will go hungry not because of anything their governments did, but because great powers decided to rearrange the board. Every empire in every era has produced brilliant strategists who could explain, with complete logical coherence, why the suffering of ordinary people was a necessary cost of something larger. They were sometimes right about the strategy, they were always wrong about the cost. The question this moment demands of all of us is not simply, is this plan clever? The question is, who is paying for it? And did anyone ask them? I'm Professor James Harper. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.